What's up, guys? Today we're going to be joined by Jared from REL, and we're going to talk about how to hook up a subwoofer using the high-level connections for a 2-channel system on a Class D amplifier.
Last time we talked a little bit, when we were talking about the Airship, we brought out the high-level cable and we talked about how we connect it and how we really take it out of the box and work with the cable versus just cutting off the ends, because when they come in the box, there'll be, about that much wire exposed. And we always recommend just pulling out the, the end of the wire just a little bit and still leaving about that much exposed so that we still have this end right here still covered. It's not acting like a live antenna when connecting to any amp, okay? There's oftentimes questions on how to hook up the high-level cable and things like that based on what class of amp we're using and things like that. In this case, we're using a Class D, and I know based off experience that when we say hooking up to a Class D amplifier, we are going to take the black wire, which is a convenient ground cable or a ground wire. We're actually going to float it in a Class D application. Now, if you ever run into an issue where you're not sure if it's Class AB, Class D, monoblock different, balance differential, anything like that, we always recommend taking the black wire and finding a ground chassis screw and connecting it that way, regardless of what type of amp you are using. We're just trying to make things a little bit easier so you're not always worrying about what way to connect this and always risking the fact that we could damage something if we could, connect it up incorrectly. So we've already used this cable before, so as you guys can see, we've already exposed some of it. But normally, again, when it comes out of box, you're gonna have about that much wire showing. So what we do is we just simply pull on the ending just a little bit to expose enough to get a good connection within the terminals of the amp. So what we're gonna do, because this is a Class D amp, and I know right away, again, how to hook it up without having to use a ground chassis screw, I'm just gonna simply connect the yellow and the red, left positive, right positive. Again, you can vice versa those if you really want to. You don't have to pay attention, yellow being left and red being right or whatever. We're just going to simply connect it to the back of the amp right now, okay? Shane here is using bananas. I've already backed out the terminals a little bit. And what we're simply going to do, while the amp is off, I always recommend making sure that the amp is off. We're gonna simply insert that in there, tighten that down, and again, for other reasons, but the one being the most prevalent here, we don't have an exposed wire out here at the end touching anything or anything like that or acting like a live antenna, okay? We're gonna float the black. Right now, if I had some electrical tape, I'd probably just tape this off, or just simply, if I wanted to and I knew I was gonna always use this amp, I would just cut it off and leave it terminated at that end, okay? So that's that for the connection into a Class D. And again, if I didn't know this was a Class D and I had a ground chassis screw on the back, I would simply take that black wire and connect it to the ground chassis screw. Before connecting any wires to a subwoofer, in experience, I always unplug it or turn it off. Generally, I just unplug it so that when I do make that connection with the high-level connection, I don't get any feedback or anything like that. It's just a simple click, turn and click, turn the power on or plug the cord in, and away you go. In this instance, we're just going to be using high level because it is a 2-channel system, no theater application here. So we'll actually only be connecting right into that connection here, and we will actually only be working with the crossover and the high-low gain.
And the amplifiers that we are using today are the XTZ Class D amplifiers. This is the model A2300, which is a 2-channel amp, 300 watts per channel. And then I've got the A2400s. These guys are mono blocks. These are going to be powering the woofers from the Perlistens, and then these guys will be powering the tweeters for both. All right, so now we're going to play some demos, correct?
Yes, and we always like to, Sneaker soundtrack, or track 4 and Sneaker soundtrack, we always like to use that as kind of our reference piece to dial in the subwoofers. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a moment here, we'll cue that up, and then we'll talk about what we're listening for while we're dialing in the subs.
So what are we adjusting first?
So right now what we're gonna do is we're going to work on the gain and the crossover, okay? We're going to bring the gain up to a comfortable level in the room so that it's not using that sneaker soundtrack, so that if I was in concert listening to this track, if I was listening to it in concert, that the bass notes and things like that are not louder than the rest of the instrumental soundstage. Does that make sense? So like if something's in the background, boom, boom, it's not obnoxiously louder than the rest of what everything else is going on. It doesn't get slapped, it stays tight, it stays clean. So as I bring the crossover up, I often will stop at a point, whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7 clicks up, and I'm like, oh, that's the spot. Like that sounds really, really good. Sometimes what I do personally is I'll take the crossover up 3 or 4 more clicks just to realize what bad sounds like. Like it's just, okay, that crossover is too high. I'm hearing things in the sub that I should not be hearing. It's getting a little distorted. It's just not what I want to hear. I'll take it back to where I settled in as being the ideal crossover for this system.
Okay, so what you're saying is it helps to have somebody do the adjustments for you while you sit in your chair and listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right now, you've got the crossover maxed all the way up higher, which I could tell I can really localize it. So what you're trying to do is kind of blend it in with the the cutoff of the main speakers, so you get a nice, smooth, even blend.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. Okay, so right now we're going to work on the phase. All right, I'm going to flip back between 0 and 180. And I know right now, based on just working with this while you were doing some action shots and things like that, which phase is louder, and I want you to verify that what I'm hearing there is the same, okay? And we definitely agreed, I gotta look, sorry. We both agree that 180 is definitely in phase with your speakers, okay? Because it's definitely louder, it's hitting at the same time your speakers are. As the sub is hitting, the speakers are hitting as well.
So that is a pretty easy thing to listen for if you have a helping hand. Otherwise, you're going back and forth to the sub and then back to your seat, which can be pretty, almost maybe impossible, depending on how good your hearing is. So definitely have a helping hand while doing this.
Yeah, so when dialing in the subwoofers, at first I always practice taking it to a volume that's pretty decent in the room so that I can hear it clearly, it's articulated and everything like that. I'm generally going to start at a decent volume, okay? And then what I'll do is I'll always start with that sneaker soundtrack, track 4, and dial in the sub to where I think it's perfect based on that reference track that we always use. Then I'm going to go into a song that's a little more aggressive, a song after that's a little more aggressive, and I keep doing that to make sure that I don't have it too loud or too quiet, and I'll dial it in as I go along setting up the subwoofer. Well, generally speaking, so right now we're on the outside wall of your place, and that outside wall is a lot more sturdier, so it's going to give you a much more rigid structure to work with. Whereas if we start working with, inner walls, placement's going to be very, very, it's important in every aspect, but when we're working on the inner walls, where they're not as solid as like an external wall is, we're going to have to really, really work with placement and focus on where it plays best in that room. And it's something as simple as moving it along the back wall inside, or moving it back out to the corner of that wall or that room, and then pulling it up into the room along the outside wall and seeing if there's a spot in that room where that sub just really pops. And, think about angles. If I can get it in a corner and shoot it across the room diagonally, it just gives me much more travel across the room until it hits that corner of the room, versus have it square in the room, hitting that back wall right away, and coming back and starting to, cancel this out, create some dead spots and things like that a lot sooner. So whenever possible, we always say if you can do corners, face it into the opposite back corner, and really we'll start there to work with your subwoofers and their placement.
And I've noticed that you've been moving it around, kind of angling it at different positions. There's some different harmonics. It hits a little bit differently.
I kind of did that intentionally with you. Is I didn't tell you to sit there and focus on listening to what I was listening to you, but you heard it without me telling you to listen for it, which is, in my opinion, very critical, because sometimes if I tell you to listen for something, you might start hearing it based on over-focus or anything like that. But yes, definitely angles. Bringing it into the room a little bit more is going to affect the timing with your speakers, things like that. So work with, obviously if you have somebody to dial a system in with and you guys listen very similarly, I would absolutely have somebody work with you. My fiance, who is a musician, we will dial in systems together all the time. And she is like, yeah, right there. And it's funny because we hear it at the same time. And I often, because I'm so anxious, sometimes move it too quickly that I pass by and I didn't even realize I passed by. So it's very important that you're doing that slowly and listening. And if you have somebody that has a good ear, have them work with you. And it's amazing the results you're gonna get by just taking time and working on placement. In this case, so in this instance, we're using this as a 2-channel system, right? The focus of this system is for the subwoofer to disappear into the soundstage, okay? When we're dialing in with just the high-level connection, you're gonna use the high-low gain on the back. It's the top middle knob in the back of the subwoofer. Of the 3 knobs, there's a third one. It's the 0.1 LFE knob. In this situation, we're not going to touch it because we're not using it. If this was a 2-channel system along with some theater application, we would then connect the 0.1 LFE as well, and then dial in the 0.1 LFE along with the high-level gain and volume.
And Jared, can you use any of these principles in a home theater setup?
With home theater, when I guess we're going to go off on a tangent just a little bit here, but with home theater, what you want to do, let's say this was your home theater room, we want to pick out the 2 dominant corners in the room. So in this case, we can talk about the 2 doorways that we have here. We don't want to use those 2 corners for obvious reasons. We want to actually focus on the 2 opposite corners that are solid, right? External wall there, no door. Internal wall here, but a good solid corner. Okay, so subwoofer placement, whether it's 2-channel, home theater, very important. And then you start dialing in once you have that placement and you're comfortable with where everything is sitting at. So yes, very good question.
Well, thanks, Jared, for stopping by. If you guys have any questions, then leave them down below. And Jared or somebody from REL will get back to you. And then, as always, guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again in the next video.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.